Great. Well, a very warm welcome, everyone, to today's Commodity Masterclass. I'm Sharon Bly, Lead Health and Sustainability here at the Consumer Goods Forum, and absolutely thrilled to be in great company with Laurent Sagara and Simon Fox of JDE Peet, and they are going to bring us through all of the risks and opportunities and call to action for even more collaboration along the coffee supply chain. So I hope that you leave here today with lots of learnings and insights. And for those of you who are here with us live, I'd just like to bring your attention to the antitrust caution statement, which you can see here on the slide in front of you. And we will be doing a live Q&A session for those of you who are with us here live, and we will respect this antitrust caution statement during that Q&A session. If you're looking at this recording in the future, please do not hesitate to reach out to me if you do have a question for Laurent and Simon, and I'm very happy to follow up with them after today's session. So please do think of your questions, and I hope that you get lots of learnings, insights, and inspiration from today's session on coffee. So with that, I'll hand it over to Laurent to kickstart today's session. So Laurent, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Sharon, for giving us first the opportunity to be here today to talk about coffee, our passion. And I would like to welcome all of you. Actually, you are listening to this coffee masterclass. So as Sharon said, my name is Laurent Sagara, and I lead the sustainability journey at JDE Peet. And with me, my colleague Simon Fox, who's looking after our climate strategy. So this session builds also on the great presentation that was done by JDE a few weeks ago on the coffee market and its challenges. And we won't repeat the data, but Sharon will drop a link to that session in the chat so that you can revisit it if you want to. Before we talk about carbon, I'd just like to say something about JDE Peet because some of you might not know who we are, but for sure you know our brands, whether it's L'Or, Dauerbert, Jacobs, Senseo, or Kenko. While we work also with tea, we are mostly a coffee company. This is 90% of our business. And we purchase around 8% of the world total coffee production. So this makes us the second largest buyer of coffee globally. And we're also the number 2 coffee player in the world and present in 39, 40 markets. So that's just to tell you a bit about us. And it means also that, I expect that several of you must have actually enjoyed one of our delicious coffee products today already. So if we move to the next slide, just to talk about coffee very briefly, coffee is an incredible beverage. It's essential, but it's also a treat. It provides us with this kick and helps us to unwind during our busy day. And it's also accessible to everyone. This is why it's one of the most drink beverage in the world. But beyond consumers, coffee also provides a living for millions of farmers. And we'll talk about them a little bit later. It brings them revenue. It's fostering socio-economical development within their community. And as the team of JDE shared in the first Coffee Masterclass, coffee is mostly grown around the equator in more than 40 countries that are highly exposed to climate risk. And this is why we're here to talk about climate, because this will potentially reduce land availability to grow food crop in general in the future, but it could directly also impact the availability of coffee. And this is why, for us, climate risk mitigation is a critical medium, long-term business risk. And this is reflected also in the way that we approach human rights and environmental due diligence in our supply chain. So before Simon dig deep into the way we address climate risk mitigation, I would just like to set the scene. So climate change, as I said, is a threat to the future of coffee and beyond. So that's really important for us. The particularity of coffee is that most farmers, they are so poor that they can't really afford the cost of adaptation of mitigation of the risk. It's not like a wheat farmer in Europe or whatever. And ultimately, the future of coffee depends on our ability, as a value chain players to fund and support the transition. If we don't invest in our supply chain, in our farmers, nothing will happen. And when I say value chain, I include the upstream, but also the retailer, because at the end, through your buying strategy and practices, you can foster further company commitment, because we all have a role to play. So if you look at the future of coffee in a nutshell, it depends on us, first of all, to collaborate, to support the farmer resilience. This is really important. We also need, meanwhile, to mitigate our own impact, because we have an impact on the environment. And finally, we need to work collectively on finding mechanisms to push the entire value chain to engage in a shared vision. And to start with talking about shared vision, I would like Simon actually to explain to you how climate change impact on our value chain has been actually approached as a sector.
So first of all, we want to look and think about what is our risk. So we usually love showing perfect green coffee trees with bright red cherries on. But on the left is actually a picture of coffee in Brazil in early 2024. This is what climate stress looks like, and it's driven by lack of rainfall. And it's not theory, it's reality. And as you know, that then leads to supply disruptions, price volatility, hedge fund speculation, etc. So the average coffee price in 2025 are now double what they were in 2023. And as we look at our climate models, it's these changing rainfall patterns and associated water stress that are the biggest issues in the long term. In some locations, irrigation could be a solution, but other solutions exist. For instance, on the right is a project in Tanzania where banana is being used to shade the coffee trees. So as you shade coffee trees, they reduce their demand on water, and the temperature is reduced. And a lot of coffee, so outside of Brazil, around 70% of the coffee land and coffee area has some level of shade, about 20% shade cover or more, to help coffee in its growing and to try to mitigate some of the issues associated with climate. And we can improve that, but it's not going to be the only solution. There are still going to be issues. So we also need to think about how we improve soil health, both nutrients and water retentions. But we don't want to be here prescribing what a farmer should do for us to meet our particular farming or regenerative agriculture standard. We want to think about how we're supporting their transition to reduce their risk. Yes, if we were here improving the soil or planting more trees, that will reduce our footprint, and that's nice. But remember, our business concern is not our carbon number. Our business concern is the risk in the picture on the left. If farmers see what's on the left too often, they don't stop farming, they just stop growing coffee. So for us, as we think about through this, we are not interested in ensuring that farmers use a particular method to reduce our carbon footprint. We see the footprint as a signal of risk. But for us, we think if we fix the risk, then the numbers will follow with it. So how do you mitigate risk? And we'd like you to challenge a little bit your own thinking about what's your approach to mitigation of your risk. Because we've certainly shifted our approach over the recent years. For many years, we've acted like traceability solves everything. And quite often legislation sadly also makes that assumption. But quite often what it does is actually push the problem aside. So we use third parties or suppliers to select the farmers that don't have the issues, or that maybe protect our brand reputation while abandoning others, and not then addressing the root causes, which in many cases is driven by poverty. So in the case of climate risk, we could select farmers or even countries with a lower footprint, and that's an option for us. That would help us present externally a lower footprint number. But will it have actually any impact and drive any change? No. Abandoned farmers will not progress and may even get worse. Most coffee farmers, as Laurent described, aren't damaging nature on purpose. They're just trying to make a living with limited options. So that's why we believe that the real work is about supporting systemic transition, not filtering out, not selecting out those with the worst data. And this forms the basis of our responsible sourcing approach, which is embedded in our human rights and environmental due diligence process. But quite often when we think about this, we need to think about, well, what is it that we're looking to protect? What is it when we say we're here to protect our value chain? What is the value chain that we're trying to de-risk? And I'd like you to just join me in a thought exercise. I'm going to talk about coffee. Please feel free to think about your own value chain. Globally, there are about 12.5 million coffee farms. And the median coffee farm is just 1 hectare. So that's just slightly bigger than a standard soccer pitch. And each of those hectares on average produces around 900 kilos of green coffee per year. So if we work that through as JDE Peet's, we are dependent on about 1 million coffee farms. So now I want you to imagine this scenario. We use traceability to select the 1 million top farmers. They have great income, no child labour issues, all are practicing great regenerative agriculture. Everything looks great on paper. But then climate change comes along. And the other 11.5 million farmers struggle. Yields plummet, coffee supply collapses. We might have felt good about our approach. Our footprint data looks great. But I can assure you of one thing. Our 1 million farmers will not sell to us. They will be selling to the highest bidder. So by selecting the best, have we really protected our value chain? Have we really protected our investors' trust in us? If our goal is to reduce our business risk, we must look beyond our suppliers to the whole system. And for us, that means our value chain is the entire coffee sector. Now for you, it might look different. But one thing is likely true. Your value chain isn't just the suppliers with the best Scope 3 numbers that supply you. And if you're in retail, it's not whether we as JDE Peet's maybe has a lower footprint than Nestle in coffee. But what's important to you is that we are both de-risking coffee for you. So for us, our net zero commitment is not about appearing to do the right thing. It's about demonstrating we are committed to managing our risks. And our risks is not having coffee. So then we have to think about, well, how do we decide where to act?
Yeah, so how do we really make a true difference? And this is where we've been really pivoting our approach to responsible sourcing. And our approach today is very simple. We assess our risk, we address our risk, and then we measure progress. So we don't rely on assumption, first of all. I mean, we use a third-party NGOs that is actually sampling over 80,000 farmers in our supplying area. So we have a random sample. It's free for the farmers, which allows us to reach the smallest farmers and the biggest ones. So it's really important. And this gives us a very clear picture of the real challenges, whether it's social, environmental, or economic. And we got those data on every single region where we source coffee. And of course, if I look at that today, I think we're probably using or sitting on one of the best data available on what is really happening in coffee globally. So that's really the first step is in assessing. And then, of course, based on that, we will address, and we'll give some example afterwards on what it means. And then we will measure our progress, and you get into a continuous improvement. So that's what we mean today by responsible sourcing. It's really understanding our risk, acting upon them, and then driving progress. And it's not about, as Simon says, it's not about excluding the farmers that need support, but it's about being part of the solution. And this is also what the CS-DDD compliance requires. Understand your risk, prioritize them, and then investing to mitigate or remediate to the prioritized human rights and environmental issue. So where are we doing that today? Well, this is what you see on this map. Today, we have more than 70 projects happening globally. So we're not a huge multinational, but actually because of our scale and the focus we have on coffee, this allows us really to invest meaningfully. And especially since we understand the issues and where they are occurring, we can really make informed choices to take effective actions. So today, those 70 projects are running in multiple countries, nearly everywhere we source coffee, and most of them are in collaboration also with civil society and the trade. And we are fully transparent about it. I mean, if you go on our website, you can see by clicking on those countries, what are the issues we are facing and what are the initiatives we put in place. And over the past 10 years, we've engaged with more than 800,000 farmers. So this is actually nearly the total of the farmers we are theoretically working with. But at the end, we need to reach 12.5 million farmers because nobody owns farmers. The farmers can sell today to you, tomorrow to somebody else. So we need to create a shared vision as a sector so that we all driving for a common outcome. This is really critical because no one alone can solve everything. So we need this shared vision. And our role today in the JDE Peet is really to build this consensus. How do we work to unite the coffee sector and beyond the walls of the roasters and traders, around this shared vision? And a very good example is actually the green coffee net zero roadmap that Simon is going to detail now.
So we've talked a little about coffee, and although coffee is coming from, as we said, the equatorial regions, it's a long distance product. It actually has a very low CO2 footprint. Though if you're adding milk, that will increase depending on which type of milk you add. But I can just assure you, your coffee habit is certainly a lower footprint than your driving habit or whatever it might be. So please relax, enjoy your coffee. And even though here it sort of seems to suggest that you should drink coffee instead of beer, in reality, the choices that we're trying to make aren't about that. It's about how do all of the products on this chart become zero? How do they get to net zero? And we're also sitting here going, I can tell you that coffee has a low impact. You might even call it a sustainable product in that sense. But it doesn't mean it doesn't have a climate risk as we've described. So a few years ago, we started with the idea that we could support change by picking low impact products to promote and work with our trade partners. And we invested to enable us to provide the carbon footprint of every SKU we sell. For black coffee in our portfolio, the footprint ranges from 20 grams to 35 grams per serving as sold. All not very different. So then we realized, are consumers really likely to be influenced by a few grams of carbon difference between products on a label? Consumers will then go and use those products in multiple different ways that then changes what the impact is. And what you see on the shelf may not actually represent the impact as consumed. So we realized we're not going to change the industry through competing on data. Consumer or customer choices are not likely to be influenced by a few grams of carbon difference between competing products. We need to get our total portfolio to net zero, so consumers can still enjoy the coffee however they want to. So the main way we can then deliver on our net zero commitments is to fix coffee farming. And as we have already said, that's our biggest risk. It's also the biggest part of our footprint. So remember, your footprint is a measure of your risk. So what can we do in coffee agriculture? So the answer is we do have a plan. We do have a net zero future for coffee agriculture. So here's a visual representation of what the sector's roadmap is up to net zero by 2050 and then beyond. So as a sector, we know what needs to be done to coffee production, to net zeros, and also with it, how much will it cost? In fact, maybe if you looked on LinkedIn, you will just see that we've just completed a study working in collaboration with Nestle and a third-party NGO called TechnoServe to evaluate the cost and benefits of transitioning coffee to regenerative agricultural practices globally. It's an investment that pays back for farmers and for exporting countries. And in this chart, it's the line that says training in the farmers. We also know that that will also help to mitigate the climate risk. So we would see this as a systemic driver of change in coffee. Farmers make more money, grow coffee better this way. And so once helped to transition, we'll continue to farm that way. This is also true when you look at the conversion of farm waste to biochar, so charcoal, which when you put it in the ground will improve the soil and water retention. But it also works when you look at all of the research done by all the countries and by independent research agencies on new varieties that are then more climate resilient. They help farmers make more money as well as build their climate resilience. So the challenge now is how to get the industry to invest collectively in supporting this transition. Now, today, only a few roasters and one trader in Europe have validated net zero science-based targets. If we all had targets, working towards the same sector would be both cheaper and more effective. Collaboration, or having at least a shared vision, is not a normal activity for competitive businesses. So in some ways, if we think about how we interact with our value chain and how we interact between us in our value chains within somewhere like the CGF, how does our interactions, how do they foster collaboration? And so we'll leave you to Laurent to share a bit about that.
Yeah. So as Simon mentioned already, one of the challenges we face today is really the focus on product-facing reassurance practices. We talk about claim, about logo, because at the end, what we need is really to focus on company commitment, to really value chain impact, because we have to go beyond the simple product. And when I look at what's happening today in the value chain, I mean, this is exactly what is happening when the retailer asks us to have a SBTi commitment. You are making all the products we put on shelf greener. And this is exactly, what we need. We need at the end to drive change. And maybe some of the product will be longer to improve than others, but at the end, the entire portfolio will become net zero at some point. And that's really important because it's driving the change. And the consequence of that, of course, is that to deliver on our scope 3, when it comes to emission, where we need also to engage our own suppliers. So we also push our suppliers to have SBTi commitment, and we create this domino effect that will deliver the impact we need. And we are progressively also moving business to those suppliers that are aligned with our need to de-risk our business. So of course, we look at price, we look at quality, we look at innovation, but sustainability is also part of the metrics that we use to select a supplier and to measure the performance of a supplier. And this is what you see on this slide, is the impact it has. Because if you just make a claim on the product, like here, a pack of capsule, you may impact 2,000 tons of carbon. If you push a company like us to be SBTi, you are impacting 5 million tons of carbon. But when I look at the impact we have when we push our suppliers to engage, we are impacting 100 million tons of carbon. And this is really where we can make the change by having this domino effect at every single step of the supply chain. But, and if you can go to the next slide, but then at the end, how does this translate to consumer choice? Because if we want to have the impact, it means that will go by the consumer picking the right product. So you have two ways. I mean, is it about the detail you put on packs or the numbers, the logo, the claims that sadly nobody reads? Or is it about retailers finding mechanism to create more value from suppliers that are engaged and delivering on their commitment? I believe in the second. Now, the last challenge is how can we enable consumers to make empowered choices? Maybe at times without even them knowing, simply by the way the product is positioned and so on. And we believe that our collective work at CGF is really to enact this change. How do we agree in embedding carbon reduction target next to financials one, in our strategy, and I would say more importantly, in our decision processes, like in procurement or in commercial practices? This alignment needs to create value. Not by each member, chasing a number or tick the box on a REGAG questionnaire and so on, but really by rewarding alignment or maybe penalizing the ones who are not doing anything. Imagine the effect if our retail partners not only ask suppliers, to have a target, but also find simple ways to guide consumers to the product from engaged companies. This is what we're already doing with our own suppliers. And thanks to that, this is how we are progressing on this journey, because it's driving impact, it's driving change. So to conclude on what we've been discussing, I mean, there is 4 points we wanted again to insist on. First one is the sector commitment and investment to support a global and inclusive transition to net zero coffee production. We need to drive systemic change, not to push aside the ones who are not ticking the box. We also need to move from a product reassurance to really company commitment to drive impact, because this is where the impact comes from, the scale, not from few products on shelf. We need to embed net zero commitment and delivery into vendor performance criteria. That's really important. If our procurement guys didn't have sustainability in their metrics, they would not act on it. And you know how it works in our organization, only what is measured is happening. And finally, we need to find mechanism to drive consumer choice towards product from committed company. At the end, the impact will come from consumer picking the product on shelves. So I hope we have sparked some thoughts as to how we at CGF can really drive change in the way we approach our challenge. And as we said, and as Simon mentioned several times, let's not chase number. Let's act on impact and change. So thank you very much. And now we're happy to answer to your questions.
So huge thank you for everything today, and we will of course include this in the future of the commodity masterclasses from the Coalition of Action. Next up is hazelnuts with Ferrero next month. So Simon and Laurent, thank you very much for sharing all of your insights today, and hopefully some of your ambitious ideas resonate with others on today's call, and we will follow up afterwards with any more questions. So thank you so much everyone for joining. Thank you.
Thanks everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.